and Beryl and the other people who are listening, welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody, especially the international people.
Give me an hour.
To our discussion about the third age of life. And
well,
we're
just
going
wait a second. No.
Beryl, we're going to carry on, if that's all right. Robin, I so enjoyed your video about the e-cycling trip through the Karoo. Wonderful, wonderful. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. Unfortunately, we couldn't use it in this current webinar, but I'm going to ask you to talk about it in any case a little later.
Right.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this next Reset webinar. And the subject today is the third age of our lives. I'm especially delighted to have my good friend, Robin Binckes, as our special guest. Robin, I looked through a printed biography of yours on Facebook or somewhere yesterday, and I was dazzled by how much you've done in your life and how much you've achieved. And I'm so pleased that we could be talking to you today about this third age, because you have made a brilliant success of it so far, and you still are in it. I want to show a short video clip about Reset. If you hold on 1 minute, it's going to come, and then we can talk further in a minute. Lane, are you there? Can you do it? Robin, okay, there we go, there we go. Okay. So double welcome to you again, Robin. And as I said, I'm so impressed with your profile and your background, but you would do a much better job of this than I would. Please talk briefly about your background. Tell us where you've been, what you've done, and how you are where you are right now, please.
You need more than 45 minutes, Johan.
Well, do what you can, please.
I'm joking with you, I'm joking. Well, I never had the good fortune to go to university. And so I, instead of going to university at a very young age, I went for a gap year to England. And the 1 year turned out to be 9, during which time I met my first wife and married her and had 2 children. But more important, I joined a company as a sales rep in England, a company called Quaker Oats Limited. who gave me the most incredible basic training of life, I suppose. And from there, I moved on to sales training and then came back to South Africa and joined OK Bazaars. I used to tell people that I was in charge of the sock department, but actually I was the sales training manager for the group. And I then became a promotions manager. And after a few years with the OK group, I started my own promotions company. And I had this idea that I could add value to companies with creative thoughts and ideas. Those days, I thought every great idea I had was, in fact, brilliant. It turned out not to be that way, of course, but for a number of years, I had a promotions and public relations company, which almost by accident ended up specializing in sport. And so, amongst other events, we were responsible for the Formula One Grand Prix. I launched a campaign in 1976 to save the Formula One Grand Prix for South Africa. I then moved into cricket, and we staged an event called the Datsun Double Wicket. I then was sent to Australia to study night cricket, which had just started with Kerry Packer. And we brought the concept back to South Africa. And for many years, we managed the Benson Hedges night cricket series in South Africa, as well as consulting to the South African cricket and been involved in every one of the, we don't talk about it anymore, but the Rebel cricket tours, which at the time we thought was quite breakthrough, but in retrospect, of course, it was perpetuating the whole of the apartheid era. I then sold my business and moved into the corporate world with a company called Entercore, and I was responsible for 12 companies, which included Budget Rent-A-Car and Springbok Atlas Safaris and Greyhound City Liner and a number of sports and leisure companies. After 2 years in that corporate world, I didn't fit the corporate world and the corporate world didn't fit me. So I resigned. And when I resigned, my chairman, who was a gentleman by the name of Mervyn Key, said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, the first thing that came into my mind was I'm going to buy a trawler and go fishing. And as I flew back to Johannesburg, I thought, well, that's actually quite a good idea. And I then started to examine the possibility of buying a trawler and ended up in a place called Gansbaai, just above Hermanus. And to cut a long story short, purchased a little fishing business in Gansbaai, which was the co-op. And we had the license to catch line fish, 35 boats caught the fish, and we bought the fish from the fishermen at an agreed price. So when there were no fish, of course, the fishermen sold to the highest bidder against the contractor. And when there was plenty of fish, they insisted on selling the fish to me. So at times I would be buying 60 tons of yellowtail at a given price. What I didn't realize when I went into the fishing business thinking that it was a license to print money was that when I caught 60 tons of yellowtail, so did every single other operator down the coast catch 60 tons or similar amounts. And as one is dealing in fresh fish, Irvin and Johnson used to just wait and then phone me and say, how many tons have you got? And what did you pay? And I'd say, we paid 7 Rand a kilo. And they'd say, well, we'll give you 3 Rand 50. And we gratefully accepted, losing 3 Rand 50 a kilo. So I soon realized that I needed a market. I went to an ex-client of mine, being the Hyperama, part of the OK group in those days, and offered to sell them line fish. they told me that their fish departments were so poor that they were going to close them down. And I took them over, which secured my retail outlets. And I then ran them as part of the Hyperama stores, but for my own account. So the stock was there, it was mine, and so were the staff. And we ended up with a number of the stores throughout the country, and then took over the OK, many of the OK stores as well. And then they asked me to take over their delicatessens, which I did. And so we had two businesses. One was called the Gansbaai Fishing Company, and the other, Sherwood's, the Good Food Company, which dealt with delicatessens. When OK Bazaar was sold for R1 to Whitey Basson of Checkers, he had a different concept and terminated our contracts in the OK stores very suddenly. In fact, I shall never forget, they notified me on Christmas Eve that they would be terminating my contract. I then felt that as I'd done this for the OK group, maybe I could do it for myself. And I built a giant food store in the Lifestyle Garden Center in Randburg called RB's Theatre of Food, which was a new concept of food and which proved to be highly successful. People would come for miles to experience the theatre of food. And people today, I say in all humility, still talk about it. It was a wonderful concept. The only thing is that it didn't make very much money. And at the time that we were operating reasonably successfully, we were approached to open up a second store. And I foolishly took in partners to finance the building of a second store, which was in what is called the Leaping Frog Center in Fourways. It was the wrong site, and one problem led to another, the main problem being that the new shareholders owned the shopping center and wouldn't allow the shop to close, despite the fact that it was losing money, but they would prefer to have it as a main magnet than to close. And eventually the business failed, dragging us all down, including myself and my wife, and led to me losing practically everything financially. So we had to start all over. And they say necessity is the mother of invention. It wasn't a planned exercise, but I felt that as I'd always been interested in the history of this country, I might try to specialize in that. I couldn't be a history professor, so I became a tour guide. I qualified to become a tour guide with a speciality of history. And I started to do historical tours of Johannesburg and Gauteng.
Do you remember how old you were at that time, Robin? How old were you?
This would have been about 2004, about 17, about 63.
So you were sort of on the verge of the third age, which is
interesting. Knocking on the door of the third age, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
And this, in fact, was one of the problems, is that at the age of 63, there was nobody who was going to employ me. It didn't matter how good I was, but 63 is no time to start a new career change or job hunting, as it were. So I did the exams and qualified to be a tour guide, and set myself a high target in terms of my market being better off Americans. And that is what I have been doing now since 2001. So for 20 years, I've been acting as a tour guide. And out of that interest in our own history, which really was a minor hobby, I became fascinated by by the history and learning more and more, to the point that I decided to write a book about one of the aspects of our history, being the Great Trek. And I decided to write a novel, having never written a book in my life before. And I wrote the book. It didn't take that long. I think it probably took about 9 months to write. And that was, I had it published when I was 70. So my first book was published when I was 70, and I've subsequently had 6 more books published. And I'm busy with 2 books at the moment. So my third chapter has been the most exciting of all of the chapters of my life.
What a wonderful, wonderful story. I can't get over the amount of writing and publishing that you have been responsible for. And I see that the Great Trek has had a second publication, or whatever you call it. It's been published for a second time, and so one of the others. Yes, you want to.
The Great Trek. In fact, for those people who are watching and who are interested in maybe turning their hand to writing, one of the biggest problems, of course, is getting a publisher. And I had the usual rejections from all the major publishers in South Africa and overseas, because I decided to spread my wings. So I've got rejection notes from just about every publisher in the country, but a very small publisher decided to read my fiction account of the Great Trek, which they did. And they then called me in and they said, look, we don't publish fiction as a rule, but we're going to publish your book on one condition. And that condition was that I had to write a non-fiction account of the Great Trek, and which I then did, which took me about 2 years. But I had a very lucky break, because the fiction book was a lot of fun, and I still believe that it's a lot of fun. It's a good read, but the history is 100% accurate. And out of that history, I then wrote the non-fiction book called The Great Trek Uncut. And that is, by South African standards, a bestseller. In other words, it sold more than 5,000 copies. And before anybody gets excited, Jacques Pauw's book sold, The President's Keeper, sold 220,000 copies. So 5,000 copies is just a drop in the ocean. But it did set me on the path of writing. And it's still been sold throughout the world on Amazon and Kindle and so on. So I had a very lucky break.
Robin, many of the people listening to you today, and many of the people that we come into contact with through our work at Reset, have in them a book somewhere. Many people want to write, but they don't know how to get started. You sound as if you made it quite easy. You made a decision and you got into it. What drove you, or what motivated? How were you able to do that?
Johan, I know it sounds ridiculous. I sat down at the laptop and I just started writing a book. And but I knew that the story of the book could be linked to that of the Great Trek. So I could mold my characters around the Great Trek, and chronologically I had a story because I had the Great Trek to follow, but I just slotted in the characters, and I had no problem writing it. I'd sit down and write, and I still do, although sometimes I think we all suffer from writer's block. I'd sit down in front of my laptop to write and then do everything possible in my study not to write. And I, having spoken to other people, they experience a similar kind of mental block to writing. But I don't find it difficult, and I don't think anybody needs to find it difficult, despite the fact that they say everybody's got a good book inside them, and that's where it should stay. I don't believe that that's the case. Everybody has a story to tell, if not about them, but certainly based on people that they know, and they can sculpture their own stories around other people's experiences if they don't feel that their own story justifies a book. And maybe the way to start, if people are interested, is to just bang away at the laptop and write what comes to mind in terms of a story, and then rewrite it, because that's how it goes.
That's amazing. And the business of planning to do some writing and then diverting yourself through everything that is available for you to Google and escape through is standard. That is a very well known mechanism for delaying the start of something. But Robin, did you ever think in your life that you would end up being an accomplished author? And look at what you've said. You know, you're busy with 2 more books now, and you've already published 6, and you started when you were 70. You know, your third age has been an extremely impressive, and this is only one of the things you've done. I'm going to talk about some of the others in a moment, but did you ever think that this was maybe in you?
You know, Johan, to be honest, other people a lot cleverer than me probably planned things like this, but I didn't plan it. I just wanted to do a book about, I felt that I could write a novel, and I felt that the topic, being the Great Trek, was a wonderfully fertile field, if you like, for me to develop characters around the event. And by doing that, I started to learn so much more, because I had to research the Great Trek and so on. And then, you know, luck played a big part, or the powers that be, whoever they are, played a big part, because that then led to writing a non-fiction book and writing a very serious account of the Great Trek, which I still believe is fairly unique in that it presents the Great Trek as being a most wonderful story of courage and fortitude on the part of the trekkers. And prior to that, I'd always seen them as cardboard cutout characters. Yeah. So for me, it's been an incredible journey of exploring and learning, and I'm still learning a lot. I know very little, and I'm learning and learning every single day.
Robin, you're also an accomplished historian, tour guide, and I wonder how that came about. And I know, because I've been on 1 or 2 of your tours, that is something that people also think about as an alternative in their third age, because it requires no capital and no special education. How did all that happen?
Well, it happened really when I lost all of our money and I had to get a job. I had to earn a living to get some form of income. And as I said earlier, to look for a job which I tried, was really a disaster area, because nobody was going to employ somebody of that age. And I had very few options available to me. And because of my interest in history, I thought, well, let's try to exploit the historical interest and turn it into a career or a fee-earning exercise. And that was what prompted me. It wasn't, again, a grand plan. It was almost desperation that there weren't many options open to me. And in fact, I can remember, and you probably can't, but I bumped into you one day in Santon City, and we stood looking down at people below us. We were on sort of a mezzanine floor. And I said to you, well, I don't know what's going to become of me. And at that stage, I think I had probably just started doing tours. And like everything, you start slowly. And today I've built up a wonderful business of tour guiding, more out of luck than anything else, to be honest with you.
One of the things that I found quite touching reading your biography, you know, I've known you for a very long time, but there's so many things about you I still don't know. One of them was that came out of this biography. You grew up in the years of racial separation and a particular political environment, but you've taken it upon yourself to make up for that, or to redress what was seen as a very faulty political situation. Would you comment on that?
Yes, I grew up through the age of apartheid in a typical privileged white home. And I grew up with all the faults that, as a product of that environment, that many of us whites had or have. I served in the Navy at the time of Sharpeville. I believed in the Swartgevaar and the communist threat that we were told was on our borders. I believed it implicitly. So for me, it was a big shock. In fact, it was my daughter who pointed out the error of my ways, she being a journalist and very liberal. It sort of was quite a shock to realize that everything that I believed in was wrong. And when I started doing tours into Alexandra Township, which was also almost an accident, my wife had worked for Weber Wenzel, the attorneys, and she was putting together an art competition, and she wanted to focus on underprivileged children. And she managed to set up a meeting with a young man in Alexandra, a man called Mbani, and she asked me to go with him on a Saturday morning to attend the meeting and to protect her. I said, well, what the hell do you think I'm going to do in Alexandra? I've never been there in my life, and I've heard that it's very dangerous. Anyway, I went into Alexandra and sat in the sun while she was in the meeting, and I was absolutely blown away by the vibrancy and the color and the noise and the excitement of Alexandra. And I just started doing my tours, and I didn't have any business. And I thought to myself, what a fantastic opportunity to take people to this township rather than places like Soweto, because this is real and unspoiled. And everybody should see how people live in a place like Alexandra. And so I started to spend time in Alexandra. And one of the places that I started to visit was one of the Zulu hostels. And the kids got to know me. They all came running. And one little girl became my favorite. Her name was Mandisa. And she was about 5 years old. And the kids used to all push her forward because they knew that if Mandisa got sweets, then they all got sweets. So she became sort of my protege. And soon after meeting her, a few months afterwards, both her parents died of AIDS. So I started, Margie and I, my wife, started to basically support her and her aunt who looked after her. And then I figured that if she had lost her parents, there were probably a lot in Alex like that. So I set about trying to start an orphan center for these kids, which was, I didn't get off the ground until Investing Bank heard what I was doing and said, look, we've got the money. You want to set up something similar. We want to set up a care center for underprivileged kids, orphans, and vulnerable children. And so I helped establish that in Alexandra. And today it looks after 350 orphan kids every day. And they come, by the way, from 4 schools. And I then, that was taken over by the Department of Social Services, but it still runs today, and they paid for, and Investec moved into other areas of community development. So it is now funded by social services. But I set up an NGO called Friends of Alexandra to focus on looking after people and children in Alexandra. So today, that little girl, by the way, that I used to look after, have continued to look after her. We sent her to a private school in Johannesburg. She couldn't speak one word of English when she went to the school. She's now got her matric certificate. We sent her to a special school to get maths for her matric, which she's now got. And she is now doing her apprenticeship as an aircraft mechanic for Safair at Oliver Tambo Airport. And we have 2 other orphans that we've looked after, which is, one is a qualified civil engineer doing a practical training, and the other has got a degree in tourism. And we have a preschool facility, which usually looks after 50 kids, but because of COVID, we're only caring for about 15 kids at the moment. So we feed them and we give them a basic education. We pay the salaries of the teachers and so. And all of this is not me, Johan. It's other people's money. I'm just a conduit for their money. So it's no big deal.
But you know, Robin, your story is so inspiring. In our Reset program, where we run a course for people who are going to be retiring, giving back is one of the sections that we pay attention to. So we encourage people, as part of their retirement, to look to some form of giving back. You have been a splendid example in this third age of getting involved and giving your time and your energy, and you have the pleasure of seeing Mandisa grow up and the others as well. My question to you is, have you always been a compassionate person? Was that from your family that you grew up in, or was this that day that you sat in Alex and it just sort of fell into your lap? And before you answer, for the people who don't know Alexandra Township, could you just describe what it is and then tell us how this whole thing came about in your life?
Okay, Alexandra Township is one of the poorest townships. And for those, you do have some overseas people, do you?
Yes, yes.
If I can explain to you that the term township is a carryover of the old apartheid days. Every town or city in South Africa, as you are, I'm sure, aware, was for white people. But outside every town or city was a township where Black people had to live by law. And today we still retain the name township, and the majority of Black people still live in the townships. Conditions in many of them have improved substantially since those old apartheid days, but Alexandra Township is known as nobody's baby. The average lifespan is 42 years. The unemployment today, who knows, after COVID, it's probably in the region of 50, 60% unemployment. To go in there on a Monday is as busy as it is on a Sunday. 30% of the people don't have electricity or water or sewage. They get their water from communal taps. They steal their electricity from those people that do have it by connecting up illegal connections and sometimes shorting out the whole area, and even in the process killing themselves or being electrocuted. So they live in shacks, and in one part of Alexandria, which has a population today probably of about 2 million people, there's one area which is 1 square mile with 1 million people living in it. And AIDS is still a big issue in a place like Alexandria. It's very much the forgotten little corner of South Africa. And so my work with Friends of Alexandria extends beyond that of looking after the children when there's a crisis, when there's fire, which is frequently, and shacks are burned down, people lose their homes and lose all their possessions, and Friends of Alexandria helps and contributes. And in answer to your question, no, I don't think I've always been a compassionate person. I probably wouldn't describe myself as a compassionate person today. I just see myself as being a conduit for other people's money who are fortunate enough, or I'm fortunate enough, that they wish to make a difference and contribute to Friends of Alexandria. All my funding comes from my overseas visitors who I take into Alexandria and who are moved. So my tour guiding has become a vehicle not only for my writing, but also for my fundraising. I don't deliberately try to tout for donations, but most compassionate people, you use the word, are so moved by Alexandria that they go back to America and write to me and say, well, we would like to help. I've been very fortunate in having people like the Vase Foundation, which also sponsors with Roger Federer other projects in Africa, but they chose mine because the director or the principal came on one of my tours. So I don't think that I would describe myself in my looking back on my life as being a compassionate human being. I think I was moved by that Saturday morning in Alex at the plight of the people. And from a selfish perspective, I was captured by the excitement and the color and the vibrancy of Alexandria. So,
Robin, it's a wonderful story, a really great story. I want to touch on another subject. One of the things we are very aware of in our third age is health. And this is the time when people start losing some of their facilities and start becoming aware of their limitations. When you invited me to participate in the e-cycle thing in the Karoo, I must tell you, I backed away from it partly because I wasn't sure whether I would make it. I now see your story and I'm envious and wish that I had taken your offer. The reason I didn't partly is because we're moving. But I'd like you, please, we've posted your video on Facebook and we'll talk about it, but would you please tell our listeners about what e-cycling is and about your adventure?
Yeah, with pleasure, Johan, and hopefully I'll convert a few people into this way of thinking, because the discovery on my part of what an e-bike has been the most uplifting and liberating event that has happened probably in my life. It started about a year ago. My wife and I did a road trip down to Cape Town, and on the way back, we drove through the Karoo. I'd done this trip many times, but for some reason, it rang a bell. And the Karoo, I just was absolutely blown away by the colors and the scenery of the Karoo. And I said to Margie, I would love to do a trip into the Karoo, but I don't want to do it in a car because that sort of, it didn't seem the right way to do it. I said, but I can't ride a bicycle, I'm too old. And I've never ridden a motorbike in my life, so I can't start now. I even investigated quad bikes, but you can't ride a quad bike on a road. And so it didn't look possible. And it's only about 2.5 months ago, I got again, prompted by my writing, one of people who had read one of my books, The Great Trek Uncut, contacted me. His name is Dave Marsh, and he said, I'd love to have coffee with you. I've read your book and I love it, and I want to talk to you about it. So we met for coffee, and he said he would like to start doing motorbike tours, following the Great Trek route and my book as the guideline. I said, that's terrific. And he said, I'm in the travel business. I've got an online travel publication which comes out daily, which is a third generation publication. And he said, I've just recently handed that over to my son, and I have started a new business. So I said, oh, well, what's that? He said, well, I have e-bikes positioned in Cape Town for overseas visitors who are elderly, who would like to explore the winelands on an e-bike. And I'm doing the same thing in Pretoria at a place called Groenkloof. Groenkloof, I don't know if you know it, but it's a nature reserve, and it's a game park. It's one of the first game parks in South Africa. And it's right on the outskirts and into Pretoria. It extends, just as a matter of interest, to 500 meters from the Gauteng station in Pretoria. Anyway, I said to him, what is this e-bike thing? And he described it to me. And he said, would you like to try it? I said, I'd love to. So I went out to Groenkloof and I rode one of his bikes in this game park. And we saw zebra and giraffe and all sorts of things while I was riding this bike. But I went up hills that I couldn't have ridden up when I was 17. And I said to him, this has got to be the most unbelievable thing. Do you think I could do this across the Karoo? He said, of course you can. He said, the e-bike just makes everything flat. It's not that you're on a motorbike. You still have to work. You still have to pedal. You're still getting exercise, but you can manage the hills and so on. I started to ride e-bikes. I tested it out. I bought an e-bike, and then I put together a trip across parts of the Karoo, a 9-day trip, and invited close friends, I should point out. Johan?
Yes.
Very close friends, some of whom declined, and I invited them to join me on the trip. And we included the Karoo, parts of the Karoo, farms in the Karoo, and then some of Thomas Baines's famous mountain passes, including the Swartberg mountain pass and Severwexpoort and so on. So we included a number of passes, and it was the best 9 days of my life. I say that unreservedly, and I believe that everybody on the trip says the same thing. Not only from a cycling point of view, we cycled about 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers, maybe 50 kilometers in a day, but the camaraderie, the places we stayed, the food, the absolute beauty of this country. And it's opened up a whole new world for me. So my chapter 3 is the most fantastic time of my life to be in.
Robin, for the people who don't know, and I discovered this on the strength of your recommendation when I went to a shop here in Joburg to look at an e-bike, and I couldn't understand when you said you could go up a mountain pass without any difficulty, and I realized that it's a pedal bike, but with a machine attached to it, a motor attached to it. Would you explain how it works and why you don't get tired?
Well, the e-bike has, the one that I have has 9 different power settings. So for a small incline, which you might find a little bit of a strain at my age, you put it on 1 or 2. And for a really steep climb, you put it on 9. The higher the power, of course, the more drainage to the battery. You have a battery which lasts for roughly 60, 70 kilometers. And it's what is called a pedal assist. So if you're not pedaling, you don't move. So you have to pedal exactly as you do riding a normal bike, but the strain is gone. And combined with the power from your battery, you have the old traditional gears that you would be familiar with, Johan, from when you
Yes.
used to ride a bike. So
Yes.
you use your gears in conjunction with the e-bike power.
Robin, I'm reconverted because I'm so impressed with what you do and where you do it. The thing that scared me initially was the 9 days in the Karoo, but putting my toes in the water somewhere like Groenkloof or somewhere else where we can do it in a day or 2 or 3 is something that I undertake to do, and I hope you might be my guide for this process. You've inspired me. Thank you very, very much. I'm getting rude signs from our technical people to say our time is up. And I just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed talking to you again. And thank you on behalf of the people all over who have listened to you and been inspired by a man who has managed his third age with great finesse and accomplishment. Thank you very much indeed.
It's my privilege and lovely chatting to you, Johan, and to all of your guests.